Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another Free Will Photos podcast. I'm your host, Chris. Today, we're talking about a routine that all photographers, doesn't matter where you are in your journey, all photographers could employ or execute every single day so they can grow and get better. We all want to grow. We all want to get better. We all want to move forward in our photography. And this routine, bar none, is going to help us grow. Now, what is this routine? It's very simple, all right? It's three things: create, edit, and post every single day. Now, I know there's a lot of people who are probably like, Chris, I don't have time to do this every single day. And for you, I'll say it's probably time for you to rethink your mindset. All right. I'm not telling you that you have to do this for an hour a day. I'm not telling you that you have to do this for 2 minutes a day. You get to choose whatever that time period is, whatever that time frame is. And when we get into these three things of creating, editing, and posting, you're going to find that there's some unique ways that you can really apply this to your own photography that fits your personality and your workflow. All right. I'm not one of those people that's going to tell you, you must do it exactly like this, because that's just not how photography is. Like, we're creatives. We have a mind of our own. We have an imagination of our own, and it needs to be explored. And that's exactly why we need to do this every single day. Now, if you're on board for learning more about how you can grow as a photographer by employing this routine, then let's go ahead and dive into it. Now, I mentioned the mindset aspect up front because it's important that you understand what's happening in your mind. Like, as a creative person, our imagination, it is in our mind. We have to be able to think things up. All right. We have to be able to come up with ideas. We have to be able to really see the vision before the thing even happens. And sometimes you're watching something happen, but we still have to process what we're watching and then identify that portion of the scene. So this is the reason why it's so important for us to have this routine every single day. That's why I'm making this episode and sharing it with you. And hopefully this is starting to click in your mind and generating a mindset for you that is inspiring you to pick up your camera and go out and create, or stay inside and create. There's really no rules or limitations to when and where or how you can create, as long as you do it safely and legally. All right. That's the only stipulation: safely and legally. And I would say even morally as well, but that's on you. So I have my notes over here because I do want to stay on topic, because this routine could go left or right, or, I can get off topic. So if you see me looking over here, if you're listening to this on an audio podcast, then it's irrelevant. But in the video podcast, probably going to see me looking off to the side. That is just the way that it is. All right. So creating daily exercises your ability to think through a situation, develop an idea, turn that idea into a composition, and then that ends in a photo. All right. So it lets you think through what's happening in front of you, which is extremely important to the creating imagination side. You're going to develop an idea of what's happening in front of you. Then that idea is going to turn into a composition, and the composition is what turns into your photo, like when you push the shutter button. Now, all of this happens really, really fast. And this is the beauty of doing this daily, because every time that we press the shutter button, we go through this exact same process. So the goal here is to get you to the point of pressing the shutter button, hitting the click. All right. The reason is the more you exercise it, the stronger you're going to get at creating. And so, this is important. Now, this process again, it's crucial because as creatives, we need to be able to do this. If we don't do it, then we kind of miss out. This process is helpful for photographers because we are an artist of exclusion. And what this really means is that we only photograph a portion of the entire scene. So if you imagine the world around you, you're only photographing a portion of the entire scene. And we have to kind of evaluate and say, okay, where is the photo? Where's the moment? Where's the thing that inspires me, right? So we are excluding everything else because everything else just isn't helpful to the story. What the thing that we're focusing on is actually helpful. So that's the reason why we want to be in this creative process constantly and creating the photo, not just seeing it. Because I know that there's a lot of people out there that are photography mentors and coaches that say, you don't need a camera, just go on a walk. And to me, I'm going to go against that because I don't think that that's the best way. I think the best way is to have your camera and to take the actual picture or create the photo. Now, on the days when you don't have a camera, but you still want to exercise your creative process, then absolutely. But you should always have a camera, even if it's just a cell phone. All right. Even if it's just a cell phone. Now, by creating an image daily, we condition our mind to evaluate constantly the world around us, and then finding inspiration, we form that idea. All right. Now, the idea could be as simple as what the texture looks like, because that could be interesting to you. What the light is actually doing, like anything that catches your eye in any given scene. This is what I'm trying to paint the picture here is important for creating. All right. The truth about the idea is that this is where your identity interacts with the scene you want to capture, because the idea is yours. And this is where original photographs come from, even though they're all the same. Many people have seen the videos or podcasts of people who, like 10 photographers photograph the same model in the same place and come up with 10 different images. Why is that? Because they came up with different ideas. They evaluated the world around them. They included what they wanted to and excluded what they didn't want. And that is the point of creating. And this is how we grow as photographers. All right. But once you have an idea, then it moves into the composition. Now, here's the deal. I'm not talking about rule of thirds or leading lines or any of that type of stuff in composition. That's important. That comes a little bit later. What I'm talking about here is the camera position, the light direction, or the direction of the length of the lens or the focal length, whatever. Colors, and there's so much more. Like you can just go down the line. This all plays into the composition. All right. If your subject is being photographed against something that's yellow and they're wearing something that's yellow, they're probably going to blend in, unless that's what you're going for, because that's going back to your idea. But if they're wearing something red and they're standing against something green, they're likely going to stand out because of the complementary colors. This all plays a part of the composition. And that has literally nothing to do with the rule of thirds or leading lines or anything like that. This is why I'm telling you it matters. Now, if you're using a telephoto lens versus a wide angle lens, framing is going to be different. And that's okay. But the point here is you have evaluated the scene, you came up with an idea, you generated a composition, and then you go into creating the frame. All right. Now, the creating the frame is the technical side. And this is where a lot of people get tripped up. They think that the camera settings makes the image. We're getting to that last. What makes the image is your ability to think through the scene, come up with an idea, generate a composition. Now, you have to come up with the camera settings that's going to complement those two things. All right. Camera settings are not that important. I want to say this very clearly. Camera settings are not that important. They are important to a degree, right? Because if you have a shutter speed that is way too fast and you're not letting enough light hit the sensor, you're not going to get a good photo. And vice versa, if you have a really slow shutter speed and a fast moving subject, it's likely going to be blurry. Now, that could be intentional. Both sides could be intentional. But the camera settings are only relative to what you are trying to capture and what the light is, or the available light to you. All right. Now, if you have to add light to your image, then by all means, get a flashlight, get an LED light, get a flash, whatever. But if you don't need to add light and you're just using the available light that's around you, then you're good to go. Your camera settings aren't that important. So here's what I would recommend when it comes to creating, because camera settings really aren't that important. Use one of the semi-auto modes, all right? Especially if your thought is fleeting, all right? Now, this is on DSLRs and wireless, mirrorless cameras. I hope they're wireless. DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, they have these settings and probably some point and shoots, aperture priority and speed priority. All right. They may be called something different, but the idea is the same. The camera does a lot of the calculations for you as long as you tell it what your aperture is or what you want your shutter speed to be. All right. And I like to consider manual mode as auto ISO mode because that's how I use manual. I leave my ISO in auto, and I really only take it out of auto whenever I know for a fact that this is the ISO that I don't want to go above. But even still, I just change my highest ISO level, whatever. That's off topic. See, that's why I got to have notes. The point that I want to make here is get your camera out of your way. You want to be focused and immersed in the creative process. Now, sometimes the technical settings on the camera really do contribute to the creative process. I fully understand that, especially if you want to do like a focus stack or something like that. But if you're doing a single exposure image or a single framed image, I recommend using one of the semi-auto modes or whatever, and just let it go. Aperture priority is probably going to be great. Remember, we're not trying to make a perfect photo. We're just trying to create a photo. There's a time and a place for getting the perfect photo in camera. And, we want to get the right photo in camera as close as we want to get there. But it doesn't always work out that way. And if you let your camera get in the way because it's like, oh, that just didn't expose properly, you're going to find that you lose creative energy. And we don't want to do that. We want to keep as much of that as we possibly can, because the next step is edit. And let me tell you, editing, you could do a lot and it could be overwhelming. There are a ton of programs on the Free Will Photos YouTube channel. I show a lot of programs, primarily on One Photo Raw, because I think that is the most comprehensive and feature-packed software on the market today. That's just my personal opinion. But the point there is editing can be overwhelming, and I don't want it to be overwhelming for you. I want it to be very simple and straightforward for you. So here's the 3 things that you really need to focus on in the editing process. All right. And a lot of this is agnostic to software. Doesn't matter what software you use. Here's the 3 things that I want you to focus on: the story of your image, the light of your image, and the composition of your image. All right. Let me repeat that. Story. What is your image trying to convey to the viewer? What do you want to tell the viewer? The light, how is the light interacting in your image? How is it helping to enhance the story? How is the light interacting with your subject? And then the composition. What's actually in your photo? Do you know? Does the composition complement the story? that you're trying to tell with the photo? Is it clear when a person looks at this photo that they know what you're actually photographing, what the subject is, and the story that's trying to be told? All three of these things, they correlate with one another. Now, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into each one because I think that that is important and only fair. All right, so let's start off with story. Bottom line up front, everyone loves a good story. I like a good story. You like a good story. Think about all of the best movies that you've ever watched. There's usually a good story. The acting could be mediocre, but if there's a good story and the actors are doing a good job at conveying that story, you're probably going to be entertained by it. We like good stories. As a photographer, you are responsible for telling the story of your image. No one else, just you. Why? Because it goes back to the creating process. You evaluated the scene, you formed the idea, you composed the image, and then you captured it. All right. It's your job to tell the story. If you leave it up to the viewer to kind of figure out like what is the story here, that is an image that is going to fail. You should tell the story. You have to tell the story. Like, the story matters the most when it comes to your image. The story matters most when it comes to the editing process. So here's what I want you to think when you are telling the story. What do you want the viewer to know when they look at your photo? Answer that question with the decisions you make with your edit. You could think in terms of hero versus villain, big versus small. You could also think in terms of happy, sad, angry, like emotions, right? We want them to feel. We want them to know. We want them to immerse themselves in our images, even if it's only for 1 second. All right. We want our images to captivate our audiences and really get them to feel something. Whatever that feeling is, you get to tell, or you get to direct that feeling based off of the story that you are telling in your photo. I can't stress story enough in the image. If you go look at any of the great photos, there's going to be a story that's being told in that photo, and the photographer is nowhere around. So we have to visually tell our stories. That is the trick to photography. But it all comes down to the editing. All right. The more your story leans towards an emotion, the more impactful the image will be to the viewer. So how do we get the impact in the image? Well, it comes down to the next two things: light and composition. So let's talk about light. Too much of it or too little, your subject becomes unrecognizable. All right. If your exposure is way too low, it gets really dark. It's just a black frame. And if it's way too high, then it's just a white frame. And then, of course, there's issues in between. We know that there's a threshold for good light in an image. And the goal is not to over or underexpose your image. It's to get the appropriate exposure of light that enhances and complements the story. All right, let me say that in a different way. You want your light to make your subjects stand out really well, but you want your subject to tell the story. All right, your light has to tell the story. And that's not just on the subject, that's the entire image. All right, so you got to think foreground, middle ground, background. And then start looking at what is the light doing in each of those planes. And if you don't have a foreground, middle ground, or background, well, then just look at wherever the planes that you do have. If you only got a foreground and a background, then great. If you only got a foreground because it's a macro shot and there is no background, then great. Whatever you have, you got to look at the light holistically across the entire image and then enhance it to tell the story that you want to tell. That's enough on light. Now we'll talk composition. When it comes to the composition, again, I'm not worried so much about rule of thirds or leading lines. This is kind of important. You should be aware of where those things are in your image, but really it goes back to telling the story. And everything that is in your frame should have a purpose to the overall story. And if it doesn't, then get rid of it. If you have conflicting colors in your image, then reduce them or remove them altogether. If you have a distracting item in your image, crop it out or use other tools to remove it. Whatever it is, it's that simple. Now, editing is important. It is probably the most important step of this entire routine, right? Create, edit, and post. Editing is probably the most important. And here's the reason why. When you edit your images, you're going to truly examine your images much more than what you were when you were creating. Because when you're creating, you're trying to be in the moment. You're engaging with the scene around you and you're capturing it. But when you come back and you put it onto your computer, sit down and look at it, you're really reviewing a moment in time. And that moment in time is going to be very different than you probably seen it, because you're going to see things that you didn't realize was in your image or not in your image when you took it. That happens to me all the time. And it happens to me till this day, right? I have cropped off hands, knees, elbows, extremities of people, right? Or I didn't photograph a photo wide enough to crop it the way that I needed to for the aspect ratio. There's all kinds of things that you will miss during the creation aspect of photography. But you'll notice in the edit aspect, because you have more time, nothing is moving, and you're looking over the entire frame. You'll even find that, oh, there's someone's hand in the bottom left corner that you didn't even notice when you were taking the photo. And that's okay. You're going to find all the issues. What I want you to do is look at those issues, refine that for your process and your ability to go back into the create portion of this routine. You should do that. But more importantly, I want you to find all the things that went right. Okay? Because a photo is a combination of everything that went right and the things that didn't go the way you expected them to. That's all it is. You shouldn't beat yourself up because, if I beat myself up over every person that I cropped an elbow off on in a portrait, I would be mortified, right? I would probably quit photography, because in almost all of my portrait shoots, I usually cut off an elbow or two on some images. And those images, I either don't use them or I enhance the crop to tell the story. I make it intentional or make it look intentional that I got rid of the elbow or a good portion of the arm. This is what's important about the editing phase. I look at everything that I got right and I find a way to enhance that to make that become the forefront of my image, as opposed to looking at everything that I got wrong and then saying this is a terrible photo. You could do that. And I think that it's good to critique and scrutinize your images. But my recommendation is you focus more on the things that you got right, because it's easier to edit and to make good photos off of the things that are good. Now, obviously, if you can't find anything good in an image, then it's probably bad. Get rid of it. All right. And that goes into culling, but we're not talking about culling. The reason I want to talk about this is because I see too many photographers beating themselves up and with the editing. Either they just are overwhelmed with the choices that are available to them in the editing software, which I completely understand. And to that, I would say just use the basic like exposure, contrast, shadows, black and white points. Just use the basic stuff for this routine. All right. You don't need to try new editing techniques where it's like, okay, I want to cross process this image. No, that's not for this routine. Is really about the idea of constantly working, constantly building, constantly perfecting and growing. And the only way that you can constantly do something is if you're doing it. It's that simple. And that's the whole goal of this podcast. That is my heart and my hope for everyone who's listening to this episode, is that you go pick up your camera, you create, edit, and post. All right. But don't beat yourself up in the editing process. It is the most important, but it is also probably the one area that you can simplify to just those three things: story, light, and composition. However you interpret that, that is up to you. Because again, you're the photographer who had the idea and then created the frame. However you tell the story, that's up to you. It should just be clear what the story is. If I have to interpret the story and make it my own story, but I have no idea what was going through your mind when you were creating the photo, then I'm going to be at a loss. Which brings me to the posting portion. And the posting portion, that actually sounds a little interesting when I say the posting portion. Sounds like a movie or something. I don't know. Anyway, posting is, I won't say it's extremely important. All right. I don't want to oversell it. But here's the deal. Just like as the viewer, if I have to interpret what is going on in the photo, then you're already a leg down in the foot race. Right. But when you post, you get an opportunity to put some text with the image. Now, before I go any further in the posting section, I am not encouraging or 100% affirming that you must put your photos on social media. That's not what I'm getting at here. For intensive purposes of posting, you could literally just export your images and put them onto a PowerPoint slide or a Google slide, and then type your description of the image underneath it and keep that local to your hard drive. You never have to share it with anyone if you don't want to. That is considered posting. The reason why we want to post is we need to give our photos a place. If we leave it in our editing software and it just sits there, they get forgotten about. And we don't actually examine our work enough. There's so many times that I go back and I look at old photos that I took and I'm like, oh yeah, I did take this photo. I forgot about this photo. Think about how many photos we just forget about. And I don't even remember the photos that I forgot. That sounds kind of funny. But another place that you could post, and this is where I like to post my work, is on a website called Vero. It's similar to Instagram, but in my opinion, it's better because it's more geared towards photography and photographers. Right? It's a great place to network. It's a great place to meet other photographers, discuss photography, share your work. But if you don't want to share it publicly, you can create a private portfolio for yourself. You just make it private and then no one sees it. But it gives you the opportunity still to type in a short description of what is going on in your photo. Or in other words, you get to tell the story of your photo, because a week, 2 weeks, a month, a couple months, a year, whatever, you're going to come back and look at your photo and you may remember the story or you may not. But if you have something that is written that tells you what the story is, then you are reminded and you get to relive that photo. Because sadly, the photos that live on my hard drive that I went and reviewed the other day, some of the stories I could remember, but a lot of them I couldn't. I don't know why I was inspired to take that photo. And I'm not saying that, if you are in a session and you walk away, let's say you go on a photo walk and you walk away with 200 photos, do you need to put a story behind each of those 200 photos? If you want to, sure, but no. I'm just saying, for this routine that you do daily, you select one of those photos out of your 200 photos that you took that day, and then you edit it, and then you write the story that goes along with it. And then you put that with the photo. Now, if neither of the options that I just suggested are interesting to you, depending on the photo editing software that you use, you could write a description in the software and attach it to the photo. The downside to this, All right. Depending on how your photo editing software works. And I don't want to get too deep into it. I'll speak about On1 because I know how On1 works. On1 creates what's known as a sidecar file. And this file sits right next to the image in the folder. Anytime that I write in the description or make an edit to the image, that sidecar file gets updated. But if that sidecar file gets deleted, gets placed somewhere where it doesn't belong, whatever happens to it, if that sidecar file goes away, I lost all of my edits. I also lost all of my notes and the description. So I can't even review it. I could still have the photo, but I may not have the notes that go along with it or the edits. So if you do use the software to write the description in the metadata, I recommend that you export the photo with that metadata in it. So that way, if the sidecar gets deleted, removed, whatever happens, you lose that hard drive, as long as you have the photo with the metadata saved in it, that counts as posting. So you really got like 3 different options of posting here. You can go full out social media, put a description in there, share it with the world. And then, social media 2.0 or 1.5, whatever you want to look at it, is you can make on Vero, you can make a private portfolio for just yourself with all that information, and then no one else sees it. That's still publishing or posting. Then you have the export your image, put it on a PowerPoint slide, and then write your notes in there, your story, your description. That's a great option. And you could do that local to your hard drive. You don't have to put that on any social media. And then if you don't even want to do the PowerPoint slide thing, and all you want to do is save your photos inside of a folder, you can do the metadata description and then export your image, and you'll have all your notes on that image. And then you just have to focus on safeguarding that folder because you want to make sure that you don't lose that folder, either hard drive space or just physically you lost the folder because you deleted it. This is why I'm partial to putting my photos with the descriptions on Vero. And what I personally do is I write the description inside of On1. I export the photo with the metadata, and then I copy what I put into the description into the description inside of Vero. So that way I have the description in 3 places and I have the photo in 3 places. That's a way of building a backup. So I know that I have an ability to go back and kind of review, and depending on where I'm at, if I'm out and about and on a bus ride and I'm like, you know what, I want to review my photos, I can do that on my Vero account and I don't have to worry about if I'm back at home on my computer. So those are the thoughts. Now, the ball's in your court. It's time for you to go and figure out how you're going to implement this routine. I don't care if you use a cell phone, or it doesn't matter if you use a cell phone or if you use a mirrorless camera or whatever. Just implement the routine. Review your images. Now, you're going to get better even if you don't review the images, because mentally you're creating new neural pathways. And, I'm not like some neuroscientist, but I do know a little bit about the brain. And one of the things I know about the brain is the more you stimulate a certain portion of it, the more it grows, the more active it becomes, and the better it is at doing the thing that you trained it to do. This is where muscle memory comes in and all kinds of other neuro-related things. The point here is, if you don't do it, your brain's not going to grow. You're not going to see progress in your photography. Or if you do see it, it's going to be very, very minuscule. It's going to happen slowly over time. But if you do implement this, I guarantee you by the end of a month, really even by the end of a week in some cases, you will see the growth. You will see your improvement. And then once you have that social proof, or, that reassurance that this is working, it's up to you to continue doing it. So my challenge to you, do it for 30 days and then review your images day 1 to day 30. And yeah, you're going to have some bad images in between. That's fine. It's life. We're not always going to make the best image, right? It's just the way it is. But just by making the image, it counts. It's very similar to working out. Even bad workouts count towards burning calories. Just saying. All right, so let me leave you with this. I'm available on Vero, and I do image reviews and I provide constructive feedback. I don't beat you down. I don't tell you that you must do what I'm telling you. I just give you ideas. I give you feedback on your photo. It's not a critique. It's literally a review and me helping you grow as a photographer. You can do this on Vero by creating a private image. Like, one, it's a free account, but two, you post your image, you make it private, and then you just add me as a viewer. I'm more than happy to review the image and provide you some quick notes on what I get from looking at the photo. And more importantly, if it tells a story, if it has good lighting, or if the lighting complements the story, and if the composition complements the story. Those are the three things that I ever evaluate anyone's photo on. I don't really worry so much about the creative aspect of the thing unless that creative aspect tells the story. Everything needs to tell a story, right? It's the only way that you're going to captivate an audience when you look at a photo. But if you don't want to do that on Vero, you're more than welcome to email a photo to me at Gmail, email a photo to me at freewellphotos@gmail.com. I'll review it there and then send it back to you with some notes and some of my ideas. I'd love to hear how you're going to apply this to your month, your week, your year, your photography journey. So if you want to send me a note over on Vero or interact with this podcast on the platform, however you can, if it allows for comments, or you can just send me an email and we'll start a discussion there. So until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.